But if we haven't met, my name is Blake. It's always a pleasure and an honor to spend some time with you guys once a month. It always blows my mind that so many of you join and hang out for an hour to an hour and a half and hear what you should be doing in your bees right now. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I am one of the owners of the Bee Supply, and if you haven't heard my story before, then you can go back and watch. I think it was the December webinar, monthly buzz webinar. I kind of gave an overview of all the different companies that I'm able to work within in the beekeeping space and how I got started in beekeeping and all that. So, but anyway, thank you for being here. Great to visit with you. Got some pretty big stuff to talk about tonight. This is the beginning of the bee season as the bees start brooding up and building up through much of the country. That requires some special management. Also have some pretty big industry news to talk about. Some of you are probably already aware of it. Just from earlier today, I was on some podcasts and webinars, and then on social media, I've been doing some posting on some of the really awful collapses that we're seeing in the beekeeping industry. So I'll be diving into that, but in a little bit later. So, a couple quick things before we jump into all that. If you haven't ordered your bees yet, highly recommend you do that. We still have a few open slots left, depending on what month you want bees. I will say that based on what I'm going to be talking about in a little bit, bees could be in short supply across the country this year. So, if you haven't ordered your bees yet, highly encourage you to get those ordered. We also have a new product. I've talked about it last month, but this is our global dry powder. So global is the pollen substitute that I use and that I highly recommend. I think it's the best pollen substitute on the market. And we've worked closely with Global for a long time, and we worked with them to develop this dry powder. So if you want to open feed dry pollen substitute, you can use this. If you want to make your own patties, you can use this. The cool thing about this is you just add water. So most or all the other pollen substitute powders, you really need to use a syrup, a corn syrup, or something so they don't dry out. The global powder that we've got here, you just have to add water. And so it's a more economical way to make pollen patties. And it's, we think, the best pollen sub out there. If you don't want to go to the trouble of mixing your own, we do have a global 15% that got back in stock today, I think. If it's not on it's today, it'll be there tomorrow. But this is in stock now for the spring season. I don't think I talk about this later tonight, but in the spring months, using pollen substitute in February can be really helpful as your bees are starting to grow. But we still get these weird cold snaps where the bees can't go out and forage for 10 days or a week, and they run out of pollen reserves in the hive, and they can start to cannibalize and develop a brood. So it's not going to kill your hive if you don't feed them pollen substitute. It's not critical. But the month where your bees are really starting to build, wherever in the country you are, that's going to shift. If you're in the South, that's right now. Whatever months your bees are really starting to build up for the spring, but it's still, you're still having nights below freezing and you're still having cold fronts coming through. That month can be really helpful to add some pollen substitute, just to keep that broodery going consistently, so it doesn't start, stop, start, stop. Stand soft sugar bricks, another great option for feeding bees if your bees don't need a ton of food. Now, if your hive is on the verge of starvation and the daytime temperatures are 60s and 70s degrees, liquid syrup is going to be the fastest way to get food to those bees. But if you're in an area where you're still in the 40s, I would say during the day, the bees aren't really going to drink syrup. And so you need something like one of these sugar bricks where it sits right on top of the cluster so the bees can eat it. Or if your hive has about enough food, but it's just a little bit short, throwing one of these on can be tremendously helpful. Jerry, tell us about the monthly February topics. What's going on there?
Hi. Gosh, there's a lot, y'all, there's a lot of questions. Y'all got me, me and James is running already. So we've got some great topics this month, and I know that Blake's going to be covering some of this, and I was not sure exactly how much because he's got this news he needs to talk about bees. So anyway, I'm not going to do a spotlight this tonight. I'm going to do something else that I think y'all are going to love. But week one, we're going to do the article that's already on the website is effective testing and treatment methods. This is a really good article to read as we start, y'all, spring is on its way. And I'm going to talk about how much that is in a second. Really and truly read this and read it for the detail. Then also I've got a video that's going to be with that coming in that same email that says visual signs of varroa. And it's a great video. Blake goes through what you can actually visually see. Week two, tips for feeding colonies in spring, and also the video results of underfeeding. Those both are also already on the website, but will come out in an email next week. Week three, hive inspections. Oops. He took it away from me, didn't he? I could have probably had one that was a cheat sheet. Anyway, hive inspections, a guide to understanding and being efficient management. Really good article. And also a hive inspections video to go along with that. And then week four, adding space and equalizing your bee yard. Y'all, I'm gonna just go ahead and admit that's my favorite time of year to be able to get out there and move things around to make everybody kind of even Steven. This is a great article and perfect for the end of the month. All right, he can just leave, Blake, you can just leave that there and I'll just keep talking. So I got with some friends today and I wanted to see because sitting here in my office and Blake may or may not use the picture, but I'm looking out at a tree that's in full bud and we've been what, 80 something today. It has been warm ever since well, we got the snow because y'all remember last month we had just come back from the expo. We were a week later doing it. Anyway, we got snow and we've been warm ever since. And it's like we're spring and the bees are even acting like it and the trees are certainly acting like it. So we've got elm tree budding all over the place and bees bringing in light yellow pollen. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to ask some of my friends that y'all may know. So I got on the horn. I talked to Cayman Reynolds today, and he said he's in just for those that don't know, northern Tennessee, southern Kentucky. So he's at the northern part of Tennessee. Maple popped yesterday, just like that. He had, matter of fact, he did a video. He had dry pollen out, and the bees all of a sudden quit taking it, and there it was. And that's why that's a good indicator. Randy McCaffrey, Dirt Rooster, you people know him. He sent me a text a minute ago. He was kind of late coming into playing the game today, but he said our bees bring in some pollen pretty much all year, which he's Alabama, Gulfport, I mean Mississippi, Gulfport, Mississippi. So southern Mississippi, kind of like where we are, even across the equator. So he's warm, tropical most of the year. But he's looking for things to be budding out here any minute. But they're not over there. I don't usually pollen sub. Generally, the bees are not getting into my open feeders or in the chicken scratch. So I'm not sure where they're foraging. Oh, he is seeing it, but he's just, see, I just got this. Um, Foraging on something, but he doesn't know what it is. He had generally red maples first thing. That's what I was looking for. Red maple, red maple. And then I talked to Brian with Castle Hives. Y'all may know him over on the internet. Northeast Ohio. It's still cold. They've still got snow on the ground, but he expects that first about March, April, he's going to see also maple. Bob Benny just emailed me a minute ago. I won't go into that, but he's a little bit slow over there. He's in Georgia, North Georgia, okay? And he'll be seeing red maple, but it's not quite yet, not quite yet. Bruce Jen out of far southeast Alabama, creamy yellow and red pollen. He thinks it might be maple or wild mustard. Y'all see where this is going? It may be henbit. I'm gonna tell you about some in Texas. Blake, just shut me up whenever you want to. I got like four more I'm gonna tell. Robert Peebles in Texas. He's in Colorado County, Elms blooming. I'm on your page, Robert. Amanda, North Texas. Tons of dandelion. Daniel in Houston, lemon tree. Kyle in Richmond, yellow pollen being stored. Gary Barber, good friend up North Texas, covered in henbit and dandelions and elm. Um, Down here, Hico, Texas. His bees are all over his deer feeder, meaning there's nothing budding out because they'll go to chicken feed and deer feed, right? We know that. And our dear friends Roy and Kieran up in just north of me, they're seeing lots of yellow pollen. Don't know quite what it is, but lots of pollen coming in these southern states. Okay, so if you're not prepared, oh, I wanted to tell you Yappy. Y'all know Yappy Bee Man? I did put him on here. He's northern Alabama. He brought up a very good point. He said red maple, dandelion, and winter weeds are blooming, and noted bees are looking for water sources to rehydrate honey for consumption. You know what? I hadn't even thought about that yet. My brain just hadn't clicked in because I've been head in this computer. But he's right, y'all. We really need to be thinking about water sources. If for some reason your bees don't have water sources, be thinking about providing it because they're going to need to get in there and get some their honey watered down a little bit so that they can do their business with getting these babies going. Do you need me to keep rattling on, or do you have it going? You need me to stop, Blake?
Oh, I didn't know you were stalling for me, Sherry.
Not
No,
really, not really. I
I
could talk if you'll just let me know. Did you find
no,
out how to get that on YouTube? I sent you some.
no. I tried what you sent and no luck. So,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
yeah, no worries, no worries. Whenever you're done,
Are
you're
you?
fine. But
Okay. Well, I'm done.
well, thank you for
You're
stalling.
welcome.
That was a really good report. Um, okay, my least favorite part. So let's talk about what is going on in the beekeeping industry right now. So this is not a pleasant thing to talk about. Honestly, this is a sit in your car and eat a whole tube of Pringles kind of discussion. I won't say that I did that, but I did. Um, so about 3 weeks ago, uh, we started noticing as an industry that winter losses were much, much higher than normal. Um, I broker a lot of bees in California, which means that a lot of people send me their bees to California to pollinate the almond groves, which we'll talk a lot about in a minute. But they send me their bees and pay me to spread out their bees in the almond orchards. And so I get truckloads of bees in from all over the country and from all sorts of bee operations. Normally, if I'm talking to growers or whoever I'm supplying with bees, um, if I have 40,000 beehives that I need in order to fulfill my contracts, I usually buffer that by about 10%. So I make the assumption that about 10% of the bees I receive are not going to be good. So if I need 40,000, I'll get 44,000 contracted from beekeepers. This year, I heard some rumblings in the fall, and I was a little nervous, and so I buffered that more by about 20% just to be safe. 10% above normal. And it was very evident as soon as we started getting truckloads of bees in January, as soon as we started inspecting hives from all over the country, that we had a major problem. Um, I would have needed to buffer those numbers by um, 50 to 70% in order to get the right number of hives. So, we were seeing 50 to 70% losses on beehives that we were receiving in from all over the country. Now, the average annual loss rate for honeybees, if we look at a 12-month period, the average annual loss rate is about 45 to 50%, which is absolutely ridiculous. It shouldn't be that high. But that's an entire 12-month period. In the loads I was getting in, I was seeing 50 to 70% loss rate just from the winter. And then you add that on top with another 40%, of an average annual loss rate. And in a lot of these operations, that was resulting in 100% loss or a 70% annual loss. or worse. And so that is staggeringly abnormal. That is not something that I've ever seen in 20 years. You know, if we go back to colony collapse disorder, when that first hit in 2006 and 2007, you know, we did see some huge losses. We suddenly went from prior to colony collapse disorder, a pretty low average annual loss rate of 10 to 20%. All of a sudden, we jumped up to 40%. And that's when we realized we had a big problem back in 2006 and 2007. And, you know, it changed everything. The whole industry changed after that. And I was a teenager, but I was already a commercial beekeeper, and so I remember that. I mean, that it was like you would walk into a room of commercial beekeepers, and you know, no one knew what to do. A room full of scientists and researchers and commercial beekeepers, and no one knew what to do. No one knew what to say. It was just devastation. And we're seeing a repeat of that today. It's the same losses, the same symptoms, the same uh, feelings that I remember feeling back in, you know, 2006 and 2007 of what on earth is going on here? What can we do? What's happening to our bees? And, you know, the troubling thing is that back then we went from a 15% average annual loss rate to a 40% average annual loss rate. This time we're starting out at a 45 to 50% annual loss rate, and we're tacking on another 30, 40% loss rate on top of that. I wouldn't be surprised if when we look at the data, when we finish gathering it all, the last 12 months could be closer to that 80% average annual loss rate for beekeepers on a commercial scale. That's completely unsustainable. You know, if when we have a 40 or 50% loss rate, as long as your remaining 50% are healthy, you can rebound. It's not easy, but you can rebound. Um, because you can take 50% of those hives, split them in half, and you're back up to your previous numbers. When you're at a 70, 80 plus percent loss rate, and a lot of the beekeepers that have seen those losses, the remaining 20 or 30% are not healthy, you can't bounce back from that. Um, you know, you just can't recover from that anymore. So that's the boat that the industry's in right now. It's really concerning. Um, I'm sure everyone's first question is why? Why? You know, what's happening? And the answer is we're not sure. I will say this is really breaking news. This has all happened over the past, you know, it's come to light over the past couple of weeks. I think the industry is better prepared for it. You know, last time we hadn't seen anything like that as an industry. And so it took months, you know, to start really collecting data and collecting samples of bees and comb, and for, you know, for researchers to mobilize and beekeepers to voice their problems. It was a very slow process. This time it's happened much faster as far as the response goes. Within 3 or 4 days of us raising the alarm in the industry, you know, the USDA, independent researchers, you know, were swarming the Central Valley where a lot of the bees are right now, and doing testing. Well, not just in the Central Valley. I mean, beekeepers whose bees collapsed all over the country. You know, researchers are going out there taking samples of bees, comb, living bees, dying bees, dead bees, pollen samples, everything to try to figure out much faster this time what's happening. We're seeing this occur across the country. It's not limited to one area. It's not limited to, you know, one type of bee. It's not limited to, we're not seeing any correlations with, you know, one specific cause. So my guess is it's a combination of a bunch of different things: pests, pathogens, pesticides, you know, and our bees have been dealing with a lot for a long time, and something has pushed them over the edge again, like like it happened almost 20 years ago now. Wow, 20 years ago? Well, yeah, I mean, almost 20 years ago. Wow, we're all getting old, folks. So something's happened to push them over the edge again. And so we're going to have to buckle down as beekeepers and work harder, work smarter, do research, and figure out what's happening. And I'm confident as an industry, um, we will survive. Bees and beekeepers are incredibly resilient. We'll figure this out. But I think the industry just changed. I think much like we look back and say, wow, CCD changed everything in the bee industry almost 20 years ago. I think we're there again, where we say, I think everything just changed. And it's a new playing field at this point. So um, I'm going to show you guys some pictures. This is, the background of this picture. These are all dead beehives. Lots of friends have sent me these pictures of like, oh my goodness, we just finished checking all of our bees, and these are the stacks of dead beehives. Pretty much every one of these pictures represents $1 million worth of lost bees. And these pictures are easy to come by right now, because they're just everywhere and in all over the country, but a lot in California because that's where all the bees are. A lot of the bees are right now. I don't think that this is some new disease that's going to spread everywhere. I don't think that's what's going on here. We would have already identified that. We would have already been able to see that. Um, I think it's more of the same. And it's the bees have reached a breaking point, and we're gonna have to find new ways to better care for them so that this doesn't happen again. Um, so you know, uh, a common question I've been getting the past few days is, "What about you, Blake? How are your bees? How's your company?" And you know, I will say I feel fortunate in some respects in that I've got good friends that I've lost everything, that 100% of their bees are dead. And they don't know if they can come back from this. And I'm not in that position. We have our bees in kind of split into two different areas that are two different operations. And one of those was hit very hard. And then the other is we're seeing more losses than normal, but they're still doing really well overall. The business where we build bees to sell, because a lot of you are probably buying bees from us, actually looks great. And so, I'm not anticipating any issues with selling bees this year. That side of the business looks really good. And that's what's so bizarre is there are operations out there that are fine, um, but most aren't. And even the ones that are fine are still seeing unusually high losses. So uh, I'm super concerned about the industry and my friends and those that have suffered these incredible losses. Some sections of our business have been hit really hard, and that's really hard. Um, but we'll pull through, and enough are still good, that we'll be okay. But it's a painful year for sure, for the industry. So so what we're asking for as an industry now is we're asking for more research dollars. um, Most bee labs and researchers don't have a budget to really address this concern. And so we need to get them funded quickly so that we can have answers quickly. And then we do need some financial relief for beekeepers who have lost almost everything. And that's so important to our food supply in the United States. I mean, if we want to protect our food supply, produce our food domestically, um, I think that's also a security issue for the United States. Then we need to take care of beekeepers who are the backbone of all of agriculture. 80 to 90 different crops rely completely on bees for pollination. And so we have to protect the beekeeper, and we have to protect bees if we want a stable, affordable food supply that's produced domestically. So we really need legislators to pay attention to this. We really need the media to pay attention to this. We need to get the word out that this is happening. If you would like a succinct summary of this, a group of us with the American Beekeeping Federation, American Honey Producers Association, Project Apis M, have put together a letter for a press release that has some data and statistics and what we're seeing in it. I'd be happy to share that with any of you. So you can reach out to the Bee Supply, just say, hey, for Blake when you email it, and I can get you a copy of that letter. If you find me on Facebook, just look for Blake Shook on Facebook. I made a post this afternoon that shared that letter with some of that data that you can copy if you go find me on Facebook. So that's what we need right now. We need to spread the word, and then we need some pretty fast relief if we want to keep a lot of beekeepers in business. So that is that. It's not great news, so I'm sorry, but I think it's really important that you're all up to date on what's happening in the industry. And I can also link below when I publish this on YouTube, I can link to that letter and some more information down in the comment section. Okay, so got that out of the way. Not great news. I'm sorry if you were jumping on because it's spring and it's warm outside and there's pollen in the air, and you're so excited to talk about bees. We are going to do that tonight. I will say that in early conversations and or some early data I've seen, it does not seem like hobby beekeepers have been as impacted, which makes sense to me as some of the commercial beekeepers. So. I'm not here to say that hobby beekeeping is about to get harder or worse, or that you're going to see huge crashes. That may not be the case. So I think there's still plenty of calls for hope and enjoying beekeeping. And it is spring, and that is an exciting time. And so yeah, let's jump into the beekeeping world a little bit and what we need to be doing in our bees. Really quick update. I do this every year because um, I spend quite a bit of time in California this time of year because that's where so many bees are. And so it is the largest pollination event in the world. And so I like to give a quick little summary of what happens in California because it's just cool. It's fun to see. This is a picture of some of the almond orchards. This was how did I think I actually hiked up there. So I'm trying to remember how did I get this picture? I'm way up there. So yeah, I think I actually hiked up into the foothills on one side of the Central Valley and took this picture of you can see the almond orchards are not in bloom yet, but pretty much all the fields you can see are almond orchards, and you're looking into a very flat valley in Central California. This is a holding yard where a lot of beekeepers overwinter their bees in holding yards in the foothills of California. So there's about 10,000 hives in view there. Some beautiful pictures of us starting to work bees. These aren't our bees. Most of our bees, some are overwintered outdoors, but most of them are overwintered indoors in atmospherically climate controlled buildings. It's a whole other story that I've talked about before, but um, a lot of beekeepers overwinter outdoors, and we take care of their bees for them. And it's cool most winters. The bees are not flying. It's too cold for them to fly. And so you can put a bunch of bees in one place because they're not flying foraging anyway. Once it starts warming up and they start flying, they get moved out of these holding yards into orchards where they can actually gather pollen and nectar, et cetera. So they're not sitting here, foraging. They're just sitting here while it's cold and they're not really flying. A lot of beekeepers send us their bees. I don't know why it's doing that. A lot of beekeepers send us their bees on semi trucks like this. This is us right at dusk. We're taking the nets off of this semi truck and unloading it to put the bees into almond orchards. Um, this is what an incredible hive looks like. This is what hives are supposed to look like. This is not what most hives look like this year. This is phenomenally strong bees. But this is often what we see in California because the almond pollen is so rich in nutrients. It's one of the most nutritious pollens on the planet. And so the bees build up incredibly strong, foraging on that pollen, and it starts very early. So while the rest of the country is, cold, you're getting this incredible pollen that's coming in California. So the bees build up really well and very, very quickly. This is just an area where we're unloading bees. There's an almond orchard in the background, and so those are some of our forklifts where they're getting ready to put bees out into the almond orchards. We load them on our smaller trucks, so they get unloaded off the semi, like you see on the left right here, and they get put onto our smaller trucks and then dispersed out into the orchards off of the smaller trucks. So those diesel trucks will hold anywhere from 80 to 120 beehives. And it takes about 30 minutes to an hour to spread those out into the orchard. Then you come back and get another load, and you do that from the time the sun goes down until the time the sun comes up. And if you're lucky, it's foggy, and you can keep spreading bees till about 11 o'clock in the morning. And then you go sleep for a few hours, and then you do it all again. These are maps that we get from almond growers telling us where to put the bees. And so some almond growers will uh, print out these maps and put an X where we're supposed to put bees. And then it's like a scavenger hunt at 2 o'clock in the morning with your smartphone in one hand and the map in the other, trying to figure out how to get to that X. So it's quite an adventure. We are getting a little more sophisticated. A lot of us now use apps like the one on the right that tell us where to put the bees. So we're slowly getting beekeeping into the 21st century. These are some pictures of bees that have been put out in the almond orchards. Usually you're only putting, anywhere from 8 to 16 hives per drop. And go a couple hundred yards and put another drop of bees. So the bees are actually incredibly spread out in California. It's not like you have tons of bees sitting in one place. They're actually spread out very, very sparsely to pollinate the orchards. So that's a quick overview of almond pollination. Let's jump into the bee yard and see what the bees are doing. They're not doing a whole lot in February, so don't get your hopes up too high. But I was able to film just a couple of videos, and I'm going to share that with you to see what we're doing in the bee yard. So here you go.
I'm going to talk for a minute about reversing boxes. It's a common question when you read beekeeping books or read social media. You might hear people talk about in late winter reversing boxes. And should you do it? Do you have to do it? Why do it? I don't have a great hive in this yard to illustrate the conditions in which you would reverse a box, but I'm going to pretend on this poor hive here. Um, Here's the concept. So reversing boxes occurs when it's helpful when over the course of the winter, all the bees have moved up into the top box. Usually there's more honey stored in the upper boxes in a beehive. And so over the course of the winter, that cluster can tend to move upwards. And sometimes in some situations, you'll get to late winter and all the bees are in the top box and no bees are in the bottom box. As a general rule of thumb, bees prefer to move up rather than down. And so if all the bees are in the upper box, what we can do is take the top box, reverse it with the bottom box, and then let it sit. And then over the course of the spring, the bees are going to move back up into the upper box. Now, do you have to do this? Absolutely not. It's a little bit helpful to the bees because, again, their nature is they'd rather move up than move down into the empty space. But if you don't reverse it, the bees will move down just a little more slowly. So to illustrate though, let's open up this hive. It does have a fair amount of bees in the top box, but let's pretend that this top box is completely full. I open it up and there's virtually no bees in the bottom box. It's really simple. All I'm going to do is break that propolis seal between the two boxes. I'm going to lift off the top box. I'm going to lift off the bottom box. And I'm going to reverse them. Just like that. And now the empty box goes on top. The full box is on the bottom. And I'm done. And now over the next month, as the queen begins to lay, the population grows, the bees are all going to move up into that now top box, which is empty, and start to fill both boxes a little faster than that they would if they had to move downward. So pretty simple. Not critical. If you're thinking, oh, I don't want to go lift those heavy boxes, don't worry about it. The bees will move down, but you'll speed them up by a few weeks if you do go ahead and reverse those boxes. I want to talk for a moment about when you can look at your bees. What are the weather conditions, and then what kind of inspection should you do based on the weather conditions? So today's a beautiful day, 65 degrees, sunny, a gentle wind. Obviously today you could go through this hive, pull out frames, look for a queen, check food stores, leave them open for as long as you need to do the inspection. But we all know that on a beautiful day, you can look at bees anytime. What conditions should you not look at bees, or what type of inspection should you do when the conditions are poor? So I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. Keep in mind, it's more important that your bees are cared for and that they have the food they need than you avoid opening them. I've worked bees in the snow before. As long as you're fast, you can you can look at bees in the snow. So here's the inspection I do. If it's cloudy, cold, drizzly, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, but I'm concerned, here's what I do. I don't bother using a smoker, by the way, because that's pretty much pointless when the bees are clustering. I quickly look under the lid, break the box apart. I'm looking at the population, at the cluster between the boxes, lift up the next boxes, get an idea for the population size. I'm going to lift up to see how much these boxes weigh, and I'm done. That's it. So 30 seconds, quick look. I've been able to see how many bees there are between the boxes, and I've got a feel for how much food they have. If the boxes are crazy light, I'm going to get one of Stan's sugar bricks on them. I might throw, I might even give them some liquid syrup too to make sure they've got the food they need, and I'm done. So very, very fast. I try to do that a couple hours before it gets dark so the bees have plenty of time to reform their cluster. That's it. If it's, 40 to 50 degrees and sunny, then, I have no problem taking the lid all the way off, pulling some frames out, not much going on here, but there's some honey, um, you know, looking at a frame, getting the lid back on, pulling the second box off, pulling up a frame, looking at it quickly. I'm probably just going to pull up one frame, put everything back together, and I'm done. So maybe a minute, if it's, cloudy, cold, 40 to 50 degrees, I can pull a frame out under a minute. I'm done. If it's above those temperatures, I take all the time I need. Bees do pretty well in the cold. They can reform the cluster. You just don't want to do that more extensive inspection, 30 minutes before it gets dark. You want to give any bees that fall out of the hive time to work their way back in. But in general, it's important that you check them for food stores, you check for population, even if the conditions aren't perfect, to make sure that they have the food they need. Because starvation will kill the bees long before cold does. So if you're new to beekeeping, or maybe you've been keeping bees for a long time, a common question is, how close together can I put my bees? And the bees get confused when they're trying to find their home. Normally I would do a video like this in our teaching bee yard with 4 or 5 hives in it, and kind of show you how to arrange things. But I want to take a second while I'm out here in our commercial holding yard in California in the 1st of February, and show you what bees are capable of and how well they can do in all sorts of conditions. So I've got a few thousand beehives behind me right now, and these have been unloaded in the last couple of nights. And they're only going to spend a couple of days here, and then they're going to go into the almond orchards to pollinate almonds. But you can see we've got each pallet of bees. There's 4 beehives on a pallet, and each hive is a couple inches apart on this pallet. And then you've got these rows of hundreds of hives, and each pallet is only 4, 5, 6 feet apart. And there is no drifting at all in this yard. I mean, what drifting is when the bees get confused about where they belong, and a bunch of the bees will kind of form a mass, drift on the hive, and you see this hive completely covered in bees. And that's when I go, uh-oh, we've got a problem. These bees are drifting. But that's a primary objective that we're trying to avoid when you arrange a bee yard. We don't want the bees to get confused. But even in this scenario where we have hundreds of hives in perfect lines, they are still doing a fantastic job at finding out which home is theirs and which hive is theirs. You notice a lot of these hives are different colors. So you might have a gray box and a white box, a mix of different colors. That does really help bees. In our operation, we try to have a mix of colors. Now, it doesn't have to be red and blue and green and orange and yellow, but like we have a lot of gray boxes and then a lot of boxes and then a lot of tan boxes, and we mix all those together, and that can help in these situations, help the bees find their way home. But even without that, the bees often do a really good job. So if you're trying to decide how to lay out your bee yard, what hive goes where, what I always tell beekeepers is do what's comfortable for you. So create enough space so that you can get all the way around each hive and work it properly. Put it at a height that's comfortable for you. Arrange it in a way that you like and is aesthetically pleasing for your backyard or your bee yard. And don't worry too much about the bees. If you've got 4 or 5 or 6 hives, they're going to do just a fine job finding their way home. You can sit on the front of the hive and that helps, or you can put them along a tree row and that helps. But if you have a few hives, you can put them in pretty much any configuration you want at any spacing that you want, and they'll be just fine. Now, one thing I would note, I would not leave these bees here, for weeks on end throughout the spring or the summer this close together. We would space them out along a tree row, etc. But for a few days, they do just fine, and they orient just fine, even in mass quantities.
All right, friends. So let me jump back in here and reshare the other screen. And here we go. Okay, so that was a quick overview out in the bee yard. Let's get into a few other interesting things that we really need to cover. So one of them is I always talk about the roller coaster this time of year because it is a little bit crazy how the weather can vary in the month of February and March and even April, depending on where you are in the country. This is actually, Sherry, this is your elm tree that's in full bloom outside your window. Sherry sent me this picture earlier today. And so a lot of the south, the elm is blooming, the dandelions are blooming, willows blooming. And then we're going to get, really cold weather next week, and it's going to be freezing at night and 40 degrees during the day. And so you really just see this roller coaster effect on the bees. And you see that, they really brood up well, and then they kind of shut down a little bit, and they brood up well and they shut down. And that's pretty normal. We see that every single year, and the bees are equipped to handle that. I mentioned, these are some of the blooms that we're seeing, but, depending on where you are in the country, you're going to see different things blooming, obviously, at different times. Across the country, though, we are seeing brood rearing ramping up. Pollen flow is up and down and all around, depending on where you are in the country. Sherry went over that earlier. And then, I am seeing a lot of bee flight, and I am seeing bees starting to eat a lot of food. So as they start rearing brood, they start consuming food very, very quickly. So one of the most important things that you need to do this time of year is monitor your food stores and ensure that you've got enough food for your bees to grow as aggressively as they want to. I've shown this before, but this, tends to hold fairly true throughout the country every year of when your major pollen flow starts. Now, I'm not really talking about when one bee brings in pollen because it's a lot earlier than these dates. But when you really start having a strong, consistent pollen flow. So I made this map from talking to a whole lot of beekeepers, and seems to hold pretty true across the country every year. And obviously there's a 2-week window in there because it can vary by a couple of weeks year to year, but it's usually pretty close to these dates when your brood rearing really kicks off strong and you have a very consistent pollen flow. I love this map. Thank you to Sherry for reminding me earlier today to include this in here. This is a really cool map. If you follow that QR code, you can watch it. They update it every single day, and it shows the plants leafing out across the country and blooms beginning to bloom. And so you can see once you really start having leaf out, you really have a pollen flow. The blooms, that's a little more of when your honey flow really begins to start.
But the cool thing is this map will show you how early or late compared to the historical average the leaf out or the blooms are. And so you can see, that blue is 15 to 20 days late. So you can see in Southeast Texas and South Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, uh, Alabama, all of Florida, you're a couple weeks late, for your leaf out, which indicates a couple weeks late for your pollen flow too. Once we start moving up, we're starting to get a little bit early. So if you're in Dallas area where I live, we're a little early. We're getting some leaf out already. It's been crazy warm, except for when it's not. But this is a cool map to follow throughout the spring to see how early or late your region is for blooms and etc. I am seeing a fair amount of this. I hate this. This is the worst thing ever. But when we have these really cold snaps, when you have snow in Florida and you have snow in Galveston, Texas, and snow along the Gulf Coast, these crazy cold snaps, you tend to have really small, weak hives die. And you can tell this hive they ran out of food because you can see there's no food anywhere in those cells. But really they ran out of bees. They got so small, so few bees that when it got cold, they couldn't survive. And so you see these clusters that just die, and that's what happened here. That's unfortunately normal to see. Inside February hives, these are some pictures I took. I mean, a weak hive in the southern US might have a frame of brood or half a frame, or in strong hives, I'm seeing them with 2, 3, 4 frames of brood already. So it just depends on the area. But, in the southern half of the United States, well, let me rephrase this. If you have a pollen flow, I would expect to see brood. So if you don't have a pollen flow, yeah, you may or may not actually have brood yet. You will see lots of cleansing flights and orientation flights, and this will just increase throughout the spring, especially as you see new bees hatching out. You'll see these orientation flights where you'll have these sudden bursts of bees come out, fly all around the hive, and then fly back in. And that's usually not swarming, it's new bees orienting to their hive. And then when you've had a cold 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and then you have a warm day, the bees have got to go to the bathroom. So they're bursting out of the hive, in mass, going to the bathroom, coming back in. So these bursts of activity can look very similar to swarming, but generally this early in the season, that's not the case. As far as feeding goes, I mean, it's pretty simple. My rule of thumb is feed as needed to maintain about 20 pounds of stores in a hive that has at least one deep box full of bees. And I'm going to be doing that through February. So they don't need 80 pounds of food on them anymore because we're coming out of winter. If you're further north, you're not really coming out of winter, but you can see it at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. You don't have to have a ton of food on your bees, but maintaining at least 20 pounds is important. Um, Once you have a pollen flow, once a pollen flow starts, you can switch to feeding 1-to-1 sugar water instead of 2-to-1. We feed 2-to-1 to put weight onto the bees for them to store that food to survive the winter. But once spring begins, we can switch to 1-to-1 because they're able to use that more quickly for rearing brood. So once your pollen flow starts, you can switch to that 1-to-1. I use division board feeders or top feeders, aka an internal feeder, rather than an entrance feeder. The reason being, the bees can be kind of robby this time of year because they're growing, but there's not a lot of nectar available to them yet. And so an entrance feeder kind of invites robber bees more than an internal feeder. And then, I'm just going to check them 2 or 3 times through the month of February to make sure that as they grow, they've got plenty of food. Pollen patties, I kind of touched on this at the very beginning, but if you've got really cold weeks or you're really wanting to split a bunch of your beehives, then giving them a pollen patty, this first month is helpful to get them to grow faster and to not cannibalize any of that brood when you've got those cold snaps. So certainly doesn't hurt. Let's talk about varroa a little bit. I'm not going to go into this for much. I'm not going to dive super deep into this, but when your bees start brooding up, you can start to get an increase in varroa mites. But right now is the opportunity to get a treatment in when there's not a ton of brood in your hive yet. Once you've got 4, 5, 6 frames of brood in your hive, your mite treatments are not going to be, oops, they're not going to be as effective. So I would do a test, once you start seeing some brood in the hive, I would do a test. If your mites are over 2 per 100 bees, February and March are a really good time to treat. And I've got down there, if you have 2 or 3 frames of brood or less, Hopguard, oxalic acid, or formic acid. I would also add, Apiguard. So I would Hopguard, maybe not, but oxalic, formic, and Apiguard, thymol are great treatments this time of year. If you've got multiple frames of brood, you're probably going to need to use Apivar or Apiguard. As a reminder, this is the seasonal varroa threat. And, we're pretty low right now in February, but that is going to increase. And the lower you can get this line now, the longer it's going to take for it to ramp up. So getting your levels down really, really low in February and March is going to mean a lower level in July and August, which results in hives that survive the summer and winter much better. To do a mite test, you can use a sticky board. The best thing to do is an alcohol wash, but a lot of beekeepers don't do them because it does kill the bees. So I do talk quite a bit about sticky boards. They are not as accurate, but I find that testing is better than not testing. So the directions are there here on the screen on how to do a sticky board test. I would absolutely recommend in February and March you do a test. Because if your mite treatments in fall were not as effective as they should be, you're going to have very high levels coming into spring, and that hive is not going to grow and thrive going into the spring and the summer. So do a test, ideally an alcohol wash, but if you're not going to do that, then here's how to do a sticky board. Another issue that I hope you run into, I hope this is a problem that you're all struggling with this year, is overcrowded hives in February. And we actually get a fair number of calls. And I'm going to, little shameless plug here. It's people that buy, our bees, of course, that call and say, oh my goodness, my hive's bursting at the seams. It's too early to do a split. What on earth do I do? So here's what you do. When your top box becomes 80% full, as a general rule of thumb, it's time to do something. You've got 3 options. You can make a split, you can add boxes, or you can equalize. So I'm going to run you through these really quickly. You can make a split in February. I don't recommend it. So the problem with February splits are queens are not available. You can't find a mated queen in general, which is kind of important to make a split. You can make a split and let the bees raise their own queen, but it's slow and it's risky because you run into the potential of not having enough drones to mate with that new queen. It's too early, to have drones. The rule of thumb usually is when you see drone brood and if you uncap some drone brood and the drones have purple eyes, so we call it the purple eye stage, which means they're a pupa that isn't that far from hatching. About then is when you can start raising queens. And when you start raising queens, it's still quite a ways until that queen is going to mate. She's takes, from the time you graft, it takes about 13 days for that grafted cell to emerge. Then she's going to go on a mating flight about 5 to 7 days later. So, in Texas, for example, I wouldn't raise queens. I wouldn't plan on having sufficient drones until mid to late March. So doing splits in February, it's highly unlikely you're going to have the drone population that's needed to properly mate with those queens. You also have potential for inclement weather. If you're trying to mate a queen, it's very common to have, cold week or 2 in February. And so it's unlikely she's going to mate properly for that reason as well. So I do not recommend splitting in February. The exception would be if you've got a hive that's so strong, they've already got swarm cells everywhere, you kind of have to make a split. That's kind of the only way to shut down the swarming urge once they've raised queen cells you could wipe out those queen cells, but typically they swarm anyway because you probably missed one. So that would be the exception to the rule. What I do recommend is you add boxes. When the top box is 80% full, just add another box. You can add a deep box of foundation and give them some, feed them 1-to-1 syrup, and they'll probably draw it out. And now you've got an extra box of comb. And then you can just add that box and then plan to do a split when queens become available in early April. The other thing I also recommend is equalize. So you can share brood bees and honey with other hives. So if your other hives in your apiary aren't that strong, then just share the resources and boost everybody up. Here's some things to keep in mind before you share resources. Number one, you need to have low mites. You don't want to spread mites all over your apiary. If you have strong hive has got a lot of mites, you don't want to share them. You don't want to have brood disease, so the brood needs to look healthy. You want to make sure you leave the original donor hive at least one deep box full of bees and brood. You don't want to take too much out of them. And then when you're gauging the strength of a strong or weak hive, do it when the temperature is over 60 degrees. Because if it's under that and the bees are clustered, it's hard to tell, is that hive really too full, or is that weak hive really that weak? So warm days over 60, gauge the strength. If you have low mite levels, no brood disease, then you can pull 2, 3, 4 frames of brood and bees out of that strong hive and give them to weaker hives. So when you're equalizing brood, here's how you're going to do it. And if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see I've got videos that walk you through exactly how to share brood between hives. But I'm going to walk you through it real quick here. You want to select frames of brood that are mostly capped. So the reason for that is that if you give a weak hive a frame that's all eggs and larvae, they have to raise those eggs and larvae into the pupa stage. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of resources. So you kind of just, dumped a huge workload on top of a hive that's already weak and struggling. So when you give them a frame of capped brood, they don't have to do anything but keep it warm, and it's going to hatch out quickly and help boost their population. So I give them a frame of cat brood, and you can shake off the bees and add that frame of brood into the very center of the brood nest on that weaker hive. You can then, you've got to make sure that the weak hive has enough bees to fully cover the new frame of brood. I wouldn't add more than 1 frame of brood to a weaker hive because they won't be able to keep it warm otherwise. And then, of course, replace the frame in the original hive with an empty frame on the outside edge. So you don't want to put an empty frame right in the dead center of a stronger hive this time of year. You can get away with it later in spring, but this time of year, when we still have cold snaps, you don't want to separate the brood nest with an empty frame. One other thing you can do is instead of shaking the bees off of this frame of brood into the original hive, if you can look at it carefully, make sure the queen isn't on it. I will often shake those bees off of the frame of brood in the very front of the weaker hive. And the old grumpy foragers that are all going to fight will fly away. And the nurse bees will crawl into the new hive and they'll be accepted right away. And that will boost the adult bee population of that weaker hive as well. To equalize honey, it's a similar process. You can just shake the bees off of a frame of honey if you've got a hive with excess honey, and then you can add that frame of honey to the outside edges of the cluster on a weaker hive. So I need to take a picture of this, but I want that frame of honey that I'm adding to a weaker hive right on the outside edge of where the cluster is. So if the cluster is right here, I'm not going to put the frame of honey right in the middle of the cluster because I never break up the cluster in a hive. I'm going to put it, I'm going to take out the frame that is right in empty frame that is right next to the cluster, and I'm going to put the frame of honey right next to the cluster so those bees can then move onto that frame of honey and eat it. That's how you do honey. Equalizing bees is pretty simple too. Like I said, when you give a weaker hive a frame of brood, you can just shake the bees off in front of the hive. You can give them extra bees. You can pull frames of bees from your strong hive. I find a frame that's full of larvae because a frame full of larvae is going to be covered in nurse bees, and nurse bees are readily accepted into other hives. Make sure the queen isn't on that frame, and then smoke the entrance of your weaker hive, and then shake the bees off the frame into the weaker hive. You can do that with up to 3 frames of bees, as long as you're not cannibalizing too many bees from your stronger hive. And that's a quick way to boost up the bee population in a weaker hive. Um, One thing I want to mention is it's important to diagnose why a weaker hive is actually weaker before you give it a whole bunch of bees and brood and resources. Because if that weaker hive is weak because they're queenless, they need a new queen. That's what's going to help them. When I have a queenless hive that's weak, I will often merge it with another queen right hive that's also weak, and then add a frame of brood. So you can take, 2 weak hives, one queenless, one queen right, merge them together. Now you've got a queen right hive, and then you can add a frame of brood and bees to boost up their strength. If they're weak because they've got a huge varroa mite population, adding a bunch of bees and brood isn't going to help. You've got to, you know, get rid of the varroa mites. You got to treat them. So try to understand why they're weaker in the first place. In most cases, they just dwindled, and it's hard to know why. And maybe they do just need a boost of bees. Um, the cutoff for me, I'm not going to add bees, brood, honey to a hive that is, that has less than 2 frames of bees and less than a frame of brood, because it's probably not going to survive anyway. Where I'm going to be adding bees and brood is a hive that has, 4, 5 frames of bees and a couple frames of brood. That's a perfect candidate for extra bees and brood so that they can catch up. And I should be able to split that hive by late March, early April if I've given them a couple frames of brood sometime in the month of February. So equalizing bees and brood is not a bad tool to employ any time of the year, essentially. I mean, dead of winter, obviously not. But I mean, we're equalizing bees in the spring, the summer, spring and the summer primarily. Anytime we're going into the bee yard and we find this super hive that's crazy strong, we might pull a frame of brood out and give it to a weaker hive. Hive inspection. So kind of touched on this already, but what to expect in February, 2 to 8 frames of brood. I know that's a huge range, but it depends on, where you are in the country, and the hive population. The stronger the hive, the more brood I expect to see. The weaker the hive, the less brood. You should see abundant and growing pollen stores. Now, this is, again, very region dependent. Remember that map I showed you. It's going to depend. In the southern United States, I do expect to see quite a bit of pollen this time of year. Actively laying queen, I expect to see that. If there's no eggs or larvae and you have a pollen flow, typically that means you don't have a queen. So there you go. Ended a couple minutes early. I'm trying to shorten these things down a little bit. We usually have done an hour and a half. And I've always noticed that once we hit about that 1 hour mark, the views really start dropping off, and I don't blame you. So we're trying to shorten these things down to
Like,
about an hour to an hour and 10 minutes, just so you guys can go about your evening a little more efficiently. But thank you for,
yeah.
I'm not ending quite yet because I'm rambling because I do still technically have a few minutes. So Sherry, what
Okay,
do you
so
got?
you have a
Oh, you're on
question.
mute, Sherry.
Oh, it doesn't say I'm on mute.
Oh,
You,
you know what? I don't think you are on mute. I think I
no,
think
I
uh
think
I
everybody
think it's
can hear
me.
me.
Hang on.
There you go.
It's Joseph. Is that Joseph?
Yeah, so
There we go.
I dismissed a question that Joseph Elam, and I actually do think he's very related to us because we met him at the one of the conferences a long time ago. But anyway, he has this question, so I'll get off. I just want to let you see
Sure.
this question and answer it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Let me look at the Q&A box real quick. Um, yeah, and if you guys want to, throw a few questions out there, you're more than welcome to. I can answer them just for a couple minutes here. But I do need to get back to my can of Pringles at some point that I referenced at the beginning here. So, um, I'm just kidding. I already ate all of them. Yeah. So someone asked, let's see, Sherry,
It's the
where is that?
dismissed one. It's the dismissed
Oh, the
one.
dismissed one. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, Joseph, you said, wondering your opinion on feeding pollen sub. Um, if I wasn't getting wholesale pricing, would I still feed pollen substitute? Also, when do you start doing splits and do you just drop in queen cells? So great question, Joseph. I would say that yes, even if I wasn't getting pollen, it's at wholesale pricing, I would absolutely still feed pollen substitute. In my own operation, we spend a fortune on pollen substitute, and I would say I average about 4 pounds of pollen substitute per hive per year. The vast majority of that I'm feeding in the fall. So I usually give hives one pollen patty in late January, and everything else I'm giving them in September and October, more or less, in the fall. And yes, I start doing splits in late March, is when I get started, and I'm in the southern United States. And yes, we drop a queen cell into every split. So that's how we do split. And we'll actually be talking about in probably well, goodness, probably uh, well, we should probably talk about splits in March. So the March monthly buzz, we should probably start talking about splits. It's a little early, it's about a month before, but if we wait till the April one, then it'll be uh you won't have time to prepare. So we'll get into splits in March. So um, great. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Thanks for watching. I know it takes real dedication to spend an hour watching a webinar on bees. So thank you. Thanks for your support and stay tuned on what's going on with the industry. I'll have probably a lot more information at next month's monthly buzz on this collapse that we're seeing and why and what and updates and numbers. So stay tuned for that. I may also just do some update videos that we'll post on our YouTube channel as I get more information throughout the coming days. So anyway, with that, have a wonderful evening, and I will see all of you in March. Bye, guys.